people interested in wetlands. My name's Annette Litherland. I'm the regional coordinator for Nelson Tasman and occasionally Marlborough. And we're going to have a talk about wetlands. So pretty well nature knows the solutions to most of our problems. And nature put wetlands and filtered the water before it entered our big rivers. Wetlands manage flows of water, provide biodiversity, remove nutrients, provide water source, and we've taken a lot of them out. But there are places where it would be relatively easy to put them in. And we want to try and do that as cheaply as possible. And little small wetlands dotted around the place that you don't need resource consent for are a potential way of doing this. So what we have, it's got a bit of a suite of things for this event. So we've got this talk, which is designed to make you be able to go out on properties and see potential sites for a wetland. If you're in the Motueka catchment, there are some of you that have said that you would be keen to build one, and we've got $4,000 towards that, and I'll be getting back to you. But you do need to be in the bounds of the Motueka catchment. And I know that looking at some of your addresses, I know already some of you are not, but I'll be getting back to all of you and letting you know, and then we'll work out something to go from there. We do have a $1.50 tree subsidy that you can use. Obviously, if you're in the Moutere catchment, you've got free trees, but if you're outside that, there is a tree subsidy that can be available to you, and sometimes the councils can also help you. So you'll be finding out a little bit about that as well. And then if you are really keen to build one and you found a site, let me know, take some photos, and I'll be able to see if I can arrange to have some people interact with you who know a lot more about it than I do. So Nathan will be coming back in autumn. Emma's offered to give some advice as well, and the 3 fish and game guys who build wetlands also would said that it would help. Yeah, so that's the sort of suite of things we've put together on this particular topic. We are leading the way a little bit in New Zealand because Tasman District Council is the only council that has a global consent for constructed wetlands. So that's the next level up, and Emma will talk a little bit about that. But we're starting to crank that up as well locally in the region. So we've got some real capability of building lots of wetlands. We're going to have 3 speakers, plenty of time to ask questions. I do ask that if you're not actually wanting to ask a question, that you put yourself on mute so that we don't get the background noise. I am taking a recording of this. There will be lots of opportunities to ask questions. You can either ask questions using the chat, or you can raise your hand using the little icon and ask a question. And if both those methods fail, just feel free to take off your mute and speak and ask a question. Right. So are there any questions before we get into our first talk, which will be Nathan, who's going to talk about the fundamental aspects of building wetlands, and then we're going to have a short talk from Emma from TDC about the TDC rules, and from Esther from Nelson City Council. And I do believe that we have Matt, who might be also there in the background, who can answer some bit more curlier questions because he's in the consenting team. Right, so Nathan, do you want to get underway and share your screen?
Yep. Is it popped up?
It has, but possibly not the right screen.
Yeah, all right. Hold a second. Share screen.
What came up with your Teams screen?
Oh, how's that?
It started sharing. I'm hopeful. There we go.
There we go. Kia ora, everybody. My name is Nathan Berkepile. I'm up here in Hawke's Bay. I'm the Hawke's Bay rep. I have the same position as Annette has, but here in Hawke's Bay. So enjoying the summer weather up here. We had a little bit more rain this year than we've had in the past, so it's nice. Today we're going to talk a little bit about wetlands. Annette wants me to focus on around putting wetlands in where we won't need, you wouldn't need consents. And despite that, as we get started, it's always a good idea to even talk to your land management advisors at the councils and just double check with them. And Emma will and a few other people might correct me sometimes in some of my stuff, because the rules and regulations vary from one region to the next. I've done some work in Nelson. I've done work in Waikato and Northland. And yeah, trying to keep the rules and regulations, it gets confusing. But the main focus is going to be around water quality improvement. But I always think that, actually biodiversity plays an important role in these things too anyway, also. So, even though we put wetlands in for water quality, we need to actually add for some biodiversity. And this is a wetland that we're working on. You can see we actually put logs and stuff in to create habitat for native fish and eels. So, every time I put a wetland in it, I don't think about solely water quality. I think about the multi-functions of wetlands. And let's see if I can get my what's going on, and my thing's not. All right, there we go. So what is a wetland? Just real quick, there's three characteristics when we think about wetlands. It's the hydrology, and that's the water. A lot of people think wetlands, most wetlands, when they think of it, they think of a lot of open water and that kind of thing. But a lot of our wetlands don't have any open water. It's that water it's either present at the surface or within the root zone of the plants. We look at the soils and the conditions of the soils. You usually find hydric soils, and they're waterlogged soils. And then we also look at what's living in those wetlands. Are the native fish, the birds, the plants, and are they adapted to wetlands? So, a lot of people look at the plants and say, all right, and a lot of regional council definitions around plant life, but but soil and hydrology play an important part also. So you got to have those three components. What a wetland is not, and this is my favorite one, it is not a sediment trap. I hear council saying, oh, your wetland is a sediment trap, but if you treat your wetland as a sediment trap, you're not going to have a wetland too much longer, because it's going to gather sediment and dry out. If you've got a sediment issue, don't use a wetland for a sediment trap. Even though we're talking about use of wetlands for water quality, it does not replace good management practice, land management practices. So it's just that added on. You got your GMPs on the lands, and then your wetland to help with improving water quality. And I like to point out that it isn't a nutrient holic. It can take nutrients, and it will cycle nutrients and that kind of thing. But I'd liken it to akin to your liver. You can drink a little bit of whiskey every night and you're okay, but if you drink a fifth every day, your liver's not going to be happy. And wetlands the same way. If you're constantly putting a lot of nutrients in it, it's not going to be happy, and it's not going to function properly. It's there to reduce nutrients, but you can't give it. You just can't rely on all right, we've got the wetland here, we can do anything and just keep putting nutrients through it. Real quick on definitions, and this is just sort of my little bugbears. Wetland restoration refers to taking a wetland and putting it back to a former condition. And a lot of people say, oh, we did some wetland restoration, but what they did was they put a lot of plants in. And to me, and to the definition, that's enhancement. It's where we have activities that increase a particular function of wetland. So when you plant a wetland, it's not really restoration, it's enhancing the wetland. What we're going to talk about today is creation of wetlands, and that's establishing wetlands where they didn't exist before. or if they did exist, they're completely destroyed and we got to recreate them. And then there's the constructed wetland, and we'll talk a little bit about constructed wetlands. And constructed wetlands are a subset of created wetlands, and they are artificial wetlands. Usually when we talk about constructed wetlands, they're for municipal and industrial wastewater, gray water, stormwater runoff type stuff. But we've used that constructed wetlands science to help us when we move into rural areas for farm runoff. So when we're talking about building a wetland for water quality, we're looking at the wetland size should be about 1 to 5% of what the catchment area is. Shoot for about 3 to 5, and that'll give us about 70 to 80% removal of nitrogen, about 50% removal of phosphorus, 40 to 50% removal of phosphorus. If we're dealing with water quality, a lot of times we want to wetland that takes surface flow, because that's usually where our water quality, where the nutrients are running off through that water flow. Generally, we want our wetlands elongated, and as we get bigger wetlands, multi-stage systems. They'll compose of a deep sediment pond, and this is what I was saying earlier. If we build a sediment pond to collect the sediment before it gets to wetland, or last longer. Shallow water, 300 mils deep, so that allows for the growth of what we call emergent vegetation growing up, and that's the vegetation that we need to help remove the nutrients. And so we want about 70% of that wetland area in shallow, 300 mils or less, and then deep water habitats greater than a half a mil. And those deep water habitats open up open water, and that open water allows for UV light to come in and reduce E. coli and that kind of thing. Now, if we were doing a wetland for biodiversity, we would probably want that 30% wetland of deep water habitat moved up to about 40 to 50%. So, you know, just a little bit to think about. You'll have your shallow zones, which will after you do your wetland. I've actually found that planting in the spring or early summer are usually the best times to plant, because you don't have flooding and that kind of thing, and the plants, as soon as you put them in, start growing. Your sides, your embankments, again, riparian plantings, go with your sedges, and those plants that you would plant on a stream bank, it would be the same thing you plant there. And because you're going to use woody species a lot of times in that embankment, winter planting is probably what you want to do best. And sorry about that. And then after you're planting, you're going to have to do some control weeds. And anybody who's planted native vegetation realizes that, you know, for the first year or two, it's a little bit of problems, and protect your plantings from grazing. When you're planting around your wetlands and you're fencing around your wetland to protect it from grazing and stuff, you want a buffer around your wetland. And the wider the buffer, the more protection you have for your wetland. I would do a minimum buffer of 5 meters around your wetlands, a little bit wider on the up the end that receives water, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Nathan, can I just cut in? If somebody's got their camera on, can you just turn your camera off? We've got a few people are having difficulty with the transmission, so if you could just switch your video off. And yeah. So really, this is a constructed wetland. Here's our sediment basin, and it flows into our wetland with our deep zone, our shallow zone, and another deep zone with the outflow. This is a wetland that would be done in an ideal situation for nutrient removal. Unfortunately, we don't live in ideal conditions. So
it's our basis, it's what we shoot for, but we don't always get that style of wetlands. Another wetland that was designed by Bex Ivers and Waikato for the Peat Lakes. She has a basically circular wetland with a shallow margin and then deep water in the middle. So she's designed hers a little bit different, but again, it's that ratio of 70 to 30. And you want that shallow, but basically what you want and the reason why it's oval is that when the water comes in, it spreads across and flows through the wetland evenly. And that's why we want it sort of elongated. Again, in an ideal world, we don't always get that ideal world. The guidelines for constructed wetlands for treatment drainage has a little calculation to, show you how to calculate your 1 to 5% of the catchment's area and how to size your wetland. So let's get into actual what we're thinking about. Edge of field wetlands. You'll hear me say edge of field or end of field, depends where you're from, what they call it. But basically, we have a field that we're farming. That most of the times that flow that when you get a rain event, the water runs off. We direct it into a sediment trap, and then run it through the wetland before it goes into a waterway. Really easy. Use of swales, and even in the fields, you could use swales to direct your water flow if you don't have it congregating at a area, to direct the surface water flow across to an area to get it into your things. We'll talk about sediment traps here in a little bit. When we're planting a wetland up in a constructed wetland, we want local dominant macrophyte species, these emergent wetland species that have deep root penetration, strong rhizomes, massive root fibers, because those root fibers in the ground give that surface area for the plants to uptake nitrogen, but also it breaks off and provides that carbon for that anaerobic zone where we get denitrification going and the release of nitric oxide. Really good sedges, rushes. A lot of people use Raupo. I don't like Raupo because Raupo dies back in the wintertime. And even though in the wintertime your wetlands aren't as effective, if you got other species of rushes and stuff that are still living in the wintertime, they're still uptaking some nutrients and still making them effective. Again, here's your margins. It's treated like your stream. You plant your sides and sedges, and as you go up, you plant your woody vegetation. And this is the emergent flooded area that we want planted. And this is where that is where the major of the work goes. We have the plants uptaking nutrients, and then you have at the bottom, there will be dead material, and it creates an anaerobic zone where we get that the nitrogen broken down into nitric oxide. Sediment traps really quickly. The size of sediment traps are really, you got to figure out based on the velocity of water flow, entering the trap. Small fields, end of field type wetlands where we're creating wetlands where they weren't existed. You usually got just a small field, and say it's a 20 hectare field, so you don't really go with a large sediment trap. But basically, the water flows into it, slows down, sediment drops out, and you see your heavy sediments drop out early on, and finer sediments dry out for it. As you think about your sediment trap, think about where you're going to put your digger to clean the sediment trap out, and make sure it's high and dry, so that and there's a way for an excavator to get in and dig that sediment trap out. And then what are you going to do with that sediment? Usually it's pretty good nutrient loaded, so you can just spread it right back on your paddock, and that kind of thing. That's what happens here. We when we built this one, we put a pile here. That pile is going to get moved back into that paddock. But you just got to think about where you're going to do your sediment and orient your sediment trap so it's easier. If your paddock's on one side of the sediment trap, you don't want your digger taking the sediment out this side. You want it on that side so we can put it into a wagon or a trailer or something like that to shift off. So it's just some things to consider when you're thinking about it. Sediment traps all along, rectangular, length to width ratio 1:5, 1:10. So, you know, again, that ovoid shape. And here's the important thing. We want to drop that speed down to less than 0.5 meters per second. And then, you know, your depth will vary. And you can see this sediment trap here. You can see all that algae growing on it. So there's a lot of phosphorus in that sediment trap there, in that sediment that's that algae is eating up. So here's just a sediment trap that I built that's just opposite to the rules because it's not oblong. It sort of goes this way. But what we did is we built a bund here. The water fills up and then slowly goes over here. And then we left a grassy margin from the fence line down to take sediment out too. This was a temporary sediment trap because we didn't think we'd have a sediment issue because there was a farm pond 200 meters up, but actually there was more sediment there than what we thought was going to come down. University of Canterbury group has a nice little graph that you could get from their website that just tells you basically how to estimate, you know, your sediment trap size. Now let's get into the fun stuff. Building a wetlands. Okay, so we're creating wetlands in places that we don't need a consent. I'm not talking about restored wetlands because usually restored wetlands still maintain a wetland characteristic that would classify them as a wetland. So you would need a consent to do it. So basically we're limited to areas that either the wetland's been completely removed and is no longer functional, or we're creating new ones. But yep, your two best things to ever use for wetlands are excavators and bulldozers. And the size of the wetlands depends what you use. We won't use too many excavators for most end of field wetlands because the size isn't that much. Most of the time we'll get away with excavators. I always recommend 16 to 20 ton, done it from 12 ton to 35 tons. But that sweet spot's about 16 or 20 tons for being able to move material quickly and efficiently. And get good operators. You know, once you develop a relationship with an operator, it's always good to have good operators. So when I come out and board and we look at a wetland, I usually have a GPS so I can mark down the location of the wetland. I can walk out the perimeter of the wetland and bring it back onto and putting on some mapping stuff. A clipboard with that I take notes on. I usually have an auger and a soil sampling because for wetlands, we're looking for soils that are more clay or a heavy silt. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. A laser level to see what my what the slope of the land is. We can't really put a wetland on a slope that's greater than 6%. And then sometimes I have a tile probe, which is just a metal probe with a plastic or rubber handle, you know, a point on it. I can look for drainage tile because there's nothing that will fail. Your wetland will fail if you don't make sure you break all those drainage tiles up. And just starting to get into using drones to do digital elevation mapping, which helps me really lay out wetlands pretty easily. So as we sit there, after I gather data, I think about project management. Where's my water source? You know, is it surface water coming off or is it groundwater that's filling my wetlands? When we're talking about water quality, we're looking at surface water. When we're doing the excavation, we're going to have excess soil. You know, where do we put those soils? We got to think these through. Erosion control. If we get a big rain event while we're doing the work, do we get any erosion control? Timing of the works. Usually most of the wetland work I do at the driest times of the year. So December, January, February, into March. April, you can get away with it, but then you got to give your time for your soils to really settle and some grass to establish to stop erosion. So I tend not to go beyond March. Consents if you need it, but we're talking about ones that don't need consent. And then you got to think about what farm activity is going on at the moment. You don't want to be operating a digger when you've got lambs over here, or you're calving for, or that kind of thing. So, you know, you just got to really think about those timings. Excuse me. So here's what here's my little bit of a key. If I dig a water a test pit, if water's seeping in and I got water at the level I want the wetland, I use a groundwater strategy. But if I do a test hole and there's no water seeping in, we go to a surface water strategy. And since we're doing water quality, we generally do surface water quality anyways. So what I'm looking for are soils that are high in clay. And if you got really high clays, you can deal with a smaller watershed. If you more of a loam or silts, you need a larger watershed to feed that water demand. So when we're talking about small wetlands at the end of fields and that kind of thing, we really want a good clay content. And the easiest way, we can take it to the labs, but the easiest way to tell the clay content is you get the soil. And this is not the topsoil. This is your underlying inorganic soils. Get it a little bit moist and you squeeze it. And if you get a ribbon that's over 5 centimeters long, that shows it has really good clay content. Won't talk about the use of synthetic liners because it's just too costly to do that for any wetland, to be honest with you, unless you are pretty rich. When I'm in the field, I generally sketch wetlands. I get back into the office and I'll pull up a mapping program and sort of draw this out and send that to the landowner and say, this is what we're thinking. The wetlands rarely look like what we draw out when we start, but at least it gives us an idea of where we're going. So I was saying about we're looking at 6% slope, because if we get a steeper slope, we got to build a bigger dam. You build a bigger dam, you end up with deep water at one end, shallow water at the other end. You don't get that even bit of water. So what we generally do is we don't want a normal dam which has a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 slope. We want a nice gentle slope on ours. But what we want is compacted clay to prevent the water from flowing under. That compacted clay will go down to an impermeable layer, so water won't flow under, and we lose water that way. Or if we get groundwater, it pushes that water up. We don't want a dam wall too high, a half meter, a meter high max, because the higher you go, the more deep water you get. All right, now we're out in the field. Found this place. This is a rough area. Old Kaykatia, there used to be a wetland here. It now is no longer classified as a wetland. You see these rushes here. They're found in wet and dry areas, but generally moist areas. So we laid out, actually, you can see we laid out 2 wetlands in this one. You know, laid it out, marked it, so when we got the digger operator there, he could see where he's going to excavate. So we get the digger operator in, he excavates the soils, breaks them apart. He takes out the topsoil and puts it in one stockpile, takes that mineral soil, puts it in another stockpile, and we'll see why. And then at the bottom of the wetland where the water's going out, this is where we're going to put our wall. So we dig down to an impermeable layer. Sometimes it's rock. Most of the time it's a clay, a heavy clay. And basically it's a gray clay. And just to show you why, you see how you can see the layers of soil. That's my supervisor. You'll see him in a lot of my photographs, her in a lot of my photographs. She's the boss. But you can see how the soil's laid down in layers. Water flows through those layers at those junctions of those layers. So by digging a trench across and filling that with clay, we're breaking those layers and reducing the amount of water flowing through those layers, so that water won't come down and flow in and underneath. The other reason we put that I call it a groundwater dam, but an underground dam is because we want to break up any clay tile because if you don't do that and you just put a little dam in and you don't break a clay tile, that clay pile is just going to suck your water right out. And you want to take out any roots and buried wood that will rot and create basically mole holes that will drain your wetland. As you see, nice impermeable layer. You can see this clay is thick. There's a good clay layer. There was a good clay layer. You can see we had to really separate this because this layer here wasn't a good clay layer. And you can see there's an organic layer in there too. And then another clay layer. So, you know, when you're excavating, what a lot of what I'm doing when I'm watching when they're excavating, I'm just keeping an eye to make sure that they put the good clay stuff aside. The crappy stuff here just gets thrown away and will get moved away later on. But we want the good clays developed. Once we build that trench, we just fill it back with clays, 15 centimeter lifts at a time, compact it, usually running over with the digger or the dozer, run over it and compact it really tight. You can see we're pushing it and compacting it. And then after that's compacted, we spread it with topsoil. And this had, that topsoil still had a lot of that organic, a lot of the vegetation. We just left that in there because that's you get the topsoil that has carbon in, but also all that grass and stuff will die when it's underwater. And that creates that carbon to actually start removing nutrients. Once you get your wall built and your excavation done, you got to think about where your water is going to flow out during high flows or and rain events. Generally, I like to spill away across the grassy, undisturbed area. And so this wetland here, the water flows, it'll flow across this flat down through here. You can't see it, but there's a high point here, so it won't flow at the base of this wall here. It'll flow down this way. If you can't get away with that, a rock spillway works really well. I would rock most spillways if I was disturbing the soil just to get and just to keep everything in place until vegetation gets on. If you're do it in the summertime and you excavated your spillway and you can get grass on it before a rain and get good cover, you're okay, but you might not be risking it. But if you have rock nearby, that's easy to get to. I would rock it. I generally don't use them unless the farmer wants me to, but culverts are a good way to spill water out. Unfortunately, they cause issues or a fish passage, and this is a weak point in your wetlands. If anything fails in your wetland, it'll be a culvert. Water control structures can be used, and I've used them in the past. I generally hate using them because they need a little bit of maintenance, and again, they can fail. Sometimes I've pulled out water control structures where the water got behind and was running behind it, and those kind of things. But this is a drop log one that if you wanted some deeper water, you just dropped another board in there and it just raised the water level. They're costly too. If you have culverts, fish passage. I know Trevor's not here, but he will be like, got to make sure you have fish passage. If I go back to like this grass spillway, and when the water's flowing across that, the eels will go right up there, and a lot of our climbing galaxids will go right up that. Same way with the rock spillway. When water flows over, there's no fish passage issues. It's just when we have a lot of times culverts, because the water flows, it erodes below where the exit of the culvert is, and you end up with a big lip. So if you put a culvert in, make sure you have fish passage. When we're talking about sizing of wetlands and we're going for that 1 to 5%, we might not be able to get that into one wetland. So I do what I call treatment chains. This is actually 2 wetlands in a series of 4 up this way, but because of the steepness of the hill, I can only put in a series of small wetlands. I have an old farm pond up there that we're using, that is sediment trap. It'll flow out of that farm pond into a series of 2 other wetlands, down into this wetland, down into this wetland. And you'll notice this little bit of this dirt here. It's just so we get that water flow through the wetland and try to get the waters moving through the wetland as much as possible. If I didn't have that, the water would come through here and then, and then straight through and out here. And this part of the wetland wouldn't be effective at treating it. So I couldn't get that oblong, but it's now oblong. It just has a bend around it. This is a spillway that we actually ended up doing. Again, we couldn't, because we couldn't get a spillway in the undisturbed soil. So we put this in, and like the day we put that in, we had a major storm, and we actually ended up had to go rebuild this. And what we ended up doing is the drain below here had a lot of nice vegetation. And so we just dug it out and we put it in there to get it established pretty much right away. And when we fixed it, and within a week, that vegetation just took it and held it in pretty good. We had a culvert at the bottom one. There's a culvert here that goes under an underpass. It's the dairy farm. Again, another small, this is just a gully system that our local Fed Farmers rep has in his place. And it was all non-native grasses. It still had it still was sort of had wetland properties, but it wouldn't have been classified as a wetland under the national policy statement. And he wanted to go in 17 hectares above. And so we ended up putting in that sediment trap that I showed earlier, these two wetlands and another one below there. And we got 2% of that, plus, actually, sorry, we got over 5% because this grassy area is all put in, is being put in sedges. So we get a nice sedgy wetland area. This one here is pretty much the open water area. So we go a sedgy wetland into an open water area. And the reason he wanted the open water there, and this is a compromise we made, is because he has a little hut there, and he wanted to sit at the hut and have tea while he's moving his cows and have a little bit of open water. And then this wetland down here would actually just we'll get emergent vegetation, and then the next little bit of open water will be down at the bottom of the other wetlands. Again, it was just too steep to do one big one, so we did 3 small ones. Yep. So we had a seepage here in this property. This was always wet-ish, and previous owners have tried to drain this and dug this and that kind of thing. And the current owner, this is up in Miranda in Waikato. We sat down with the Waikato Regional Council, and they went through this and said, nope, it's not classified as a wetland, so we could actually go to wetlands in here. This up here would have been classified as a wetland, so we didn't touch that. And this, I think, would have had enough vegetation it could be, but the land management officer and the consent officer said, nah, it's not a wetland. So what we did, we came in, dug across here, put our blockage here, and this is capturing this whole hillside. Everything flowing from this hillside goes into here. There's a potential down here at this one to put another wetland that's capturing this other hillside. And you can see what we did. We just built this wetland from here. It's sort of a long, thin wetland. This landowner wanted biodiversity, so you can see we put in, and this is where we put in a whole bunch of old macrocarpus stumps for the eels and native fish to go through. Another view of it, we've got a deeper water right here in the middle, and then the shallow water here, and the water level will go up. This is 200 to 300 mils, the shallow water up through. And again, we had a dam here and a dam here because of the slope. So we ended up with actually 3 different separate wetlands. But again, you can see all this runoff comes down the hill into the wetland and flows down through. This is what the wetland looks like right as they planted about 3 months later. As you can see, there's some vegetation already growing in it. It greened up really nice. And the field, this is, I'll just show you, this is a low-lying area. It's gets wet in the wintertime, dry in the summertime. They do summer grazing here, but this is actually a perfect place to put a wetland. It gets runoff from this field and this field over here flow into it. And this is one, actually, we're going to be putting one in this, hopefully next month. Tile drains are always at the end of tile drains. You usually don't need a consent to do that. There's a tile drain that goes into this sediment pond here and then down through a wetland. This is done by the Pamahaka Water Care Group. Here's an end of drain wetland that you got these drains coming in, and it opened up into an open channel before it went down the stream. And so this is the area we're going to excavate out and create a wetland through this low area up to the drain exit. Now, again, we don't work in a real world situation sometimes because there's a drain outlet up here that we're going to treat, but right at the end of the wetland where we're putting it in, I found another drain outlet that'll be flowing into the wetlands. So we will be treating that drainage, but this drain here, it flows into the bottom part of the wetland, so it's not going to get a lot of treatment done. And we didn't have room below it to put another wetland in. So, we have to work with what we have. Shallow gully systems are really ideal. They're normally usually where water flows anyways. So this one down here would have been classified as a wetland based on the national policy statement. However, we were lucky enough that actually it wasn't this was all blackberry over here, and when we dug out through the blackberry, it was an old dam wall there. So it wasn't classified as a wetland anymore because it was a dam wall repair, which basically we just tore the dam wall out and replaced some of it and didn't lift it up as high as it was, but it was a failed dam wall. And what we did is, again, when we got treatment changed wetlands, and then it flows through part of the gully that is dry most of the year, but it'll have nice native sedge vegetation. Sediment can drop out, dropping into a whole bunch, a little bit of open water and some more wetlands down through. And then this is a shallow wetland with this little bit at the end being open water. So we were just using it. It just wasn't good grazing. It wasn't a deep gully, but it works at creating a wetland system through there. Just a sort of a map of one that I'm working on with Massey University. Again, we have this gully system here, and this was my first go at it. Just met with them. We've actually got a couple drains coming in other places, and I did some measurements in three dams walls, or three short small dams and a sediment pond aren't going to work in this section. We're going to actually move this wetland up the gully a couple more small wetlands through, but basically runs down into a sediment trap, flows out that sediment trap through what we'll be planting in native sedges to help keep removing nutrients into another wetland with native sedges and rushes, then down into the next one, down into the next one, and then down into here, and the culvert goes over to the other side of the road. Again, it's not great grazing. It's hard to, it's easier for these guys to fence up here on the flat than down in the gully system. Again, nice, you can see this gully system's eroded, has a channel going through, but you can see it's fairly flat. This is a perfect place to put a wetlands through and before it goes into waterways. And one of my personal favorites, we just started doing a lot of this, is we've been converting old farm dams into wetlands. And farm dams fall out of consentings for the most part because we're not raising the dam walls or anything like that. In fact, actually, a lot of times we're lowering it. This is the old dam wall, and you can see where the water level is now after we did the wetlands. But again, we've got some we've got some open water areas and it flows down into, and here's another open water area where this water flows. There's subsurface drainage coming in here, surface drainage here, subsurface here. I think there's a subsurface drain coming in somewhere over here, but we have a mix of open water throughout it and shallow water. And to get that elongation, we meandered that wetlands through, and this is, as you can see, we're still working on it. We've got deeper water in places and meandering through to shallow water, and to get that 5%. We were shooting for 5% here. Originally, the water, when this dam was in place, the water ran into a gully system here, or into a drainage system here. The old stream bed was right here. We redug the old stream bed because it was dry at the time, and it wasn't an old stream bed anymore because it hadn't been connected for a while. And we put in a culvert here and reconnected and sent that water down through the old stream bed, which is actually pretty cool that we actually put it through a stream bed, fence this off. Now we've got some really good fish habitat, hopefully, through there. But you see this a lot of times on farms. We see these old farm dams. Either they weren't put in correctly, they're drying out, but they are pretty decent places to start looking at wetlands. This one, we're going to re-dig the wall out because the wall wasn't keyed in properly, so the water's flowing underneath the wall and drying this place out, and then building up through. Because it's a dam wall, we're doing what most councils consider dam repairs, and somebody from TDC or will be able to go around that. But here in Hawke's Bay, dam repairs aren't, unless you're lifting the level of the dam wall. Dam repairs are permitted activity. Another pond that's suitable, you can just see it's just nice and shallow. And basically this guy, all this guy has to do is actually fence this one and plant it. And there's a little bit of erosion here, fix that erosion, but this one's already sort of a nice wetland, probably a sediment pond in here, but all he has, this is all shallow water. So not much to do to convert that into a wetland that will take up nutrients. I know that was fast, but yep. Oh, actually, it wasn't fast, was it?
Okay,
But
thanks, Nathan.
sorry about that. I went a little over time.
That's all right. Just the obvious question: what sort of ballpark costs are some of these smaller wetlands that you're building, just from the earthworks point of view?
All the ones that we talked about in this presentation were between 2,000 to 5,000. That was pre-COVID, or pre this last year or this winter. The fuel prices going up, so they'll go up. The cost will go up another $1,000 for them. Usually 2 to 3 days worth of work with a digger. So you're looking at usually $1,000 a day. It's going to be around $1,200 to $1,500 a day now for a digger to do the work.
Right. So anybody else?
Yep.
Anybody else got any questions? Nathan, do you fence off all of those little wetlands?
Yep.
So afterwards, they also have to be fenced off.
There's no sense putting them in if you're not going to fence them off, because the livestock would just kill them. Yep. That being said, we not in this one, but we put a couple in in the horticultural areas, which we didn't fence off because we don't have any grazing there. They don't even winter graze with sheep, so they didn't need to be fenced. But yeah. But the trees actually, when we planted the trees, and they actually act as sort of a physical barrier anyways for sprays and the vehicles, so they know not to run into the wetlands.
Cool. Emma, can you start getting ready for your talk? Are there any other questions from people?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yep.
Nathan, is Gambusia an issue where you're working in the North Island? And if it is, what sort of measures do you put in place to prevent them or not entering your constructed wetlands?
Elliot, I'll leave it to you to ask me a tough one. No. Gambusia is pretty much throughout the North Island. I'm not, most of the wetlands I'm dealing with generally don't have Gambusia in, and they're disconnected from major waterways. So, yeah, but it is always a, it is, luckily Hawke's Bay doesn't have, koi carp, but koi carp are another one that can cause a lot of issues. And, but yeah, a lot of my end of field wetlands basically are seasonally, they get seasonal flows. So, doing those seasonal flows, you'll get eels into them. And if any Gambusia get in, usually the eels will deal with them pretty quickly. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Elliot.
Yeah, or what about putting a steep gradient on the spillways that would stop them coming upstream? Is that something that you consider or look at?
Yeah, you could. I don't. The nice thing about Gambusia is they're not climbers like a lot of our galaxids. So if like those, like a rock spillway, would probably be a fairly decent barrier for a lot of if water's flowing over that at a fairly rate, it'd probably be a pretty decent barrier. And your rope would completely be a barrier too. Yeah, Gambusia always an interesting one. I mean, you got Gambusia, we have goldfish pop up everywhere. So, but in a lot of my wetlands, like I said, the water doesn't flow out of them year round. So if you get eels in there, the Gambusia get locked in there, and the eels just will have a heyday. One thing I didn't say though is when, oh no, never mind. It won't matter with these.
Nathan,
Somebody asked if I recommended a 5-meter buffer, and 5-meter buffer would be a minimum, would be what I'd recommend.
yes. So the wetlands continue to grow.
Yeah. The plants in there well, the nice thing is when you deal with sedges and that kind of thing, they grow, you get really good coverage, so you don't get a lot of weeds, especially some of the ones that we've planted a couple of wetlands in basically Carixiectas, and they grow so thick that you don't get any weed growth in there at all. But when you get underneath, there's a lot of nice flow through it. It looks like it's thick, and then you crawl down and you take a look, and it's just clear as. Yeah, and so you still get movement through them.
Okay, excellent. Emma, if you'd like to take over the screen.
Thanks, Annette, and thank you, Nathan. I'll just share.
You might like to introduce who you are for those people who don't know who you are.
I will. I'll get this. Is that showing up for everyone? You're on mute, Annette.
Sorry, you just need to start this the slideshow.
Okay. There.
Perfect.
Right. Well, hi everyone. I'm Emma Woods. I work as the Catchment Enhancement Officer at Tasman District Council. So I'm part of the Catchment and Freshwater Improvement team. And we've got the members of the team on today. We've got Leah Reid, who works with the Freshwater Improvement Fund Wetlands Project and is involved in constructed wetland projects and enhancing natural wetlands. And Trevor James, who Nathan mentioned, he's also been working on constructed wetland projects for a number of years. I manage the Catchment Enhancement Fund, and through that fund we support through funding and also kind of design resources further constructed wetland projects. Yeah, and so today, not going into the details of construction like Nathan has really well, I'm more talking about what we need to do to assess whether the project you're interested in needs consent or not, because it's a lot more complex now than it used to be with all of the new freshwater legislation on board. So just to get started, and I'll go through a couple of catchment characteristics that you can look at to assess whether a site might be suitable for a wetland as a permitted activity. And then I'll just share our contact details and who and what we'll talk about at TDC to figure out whether we go down the permitted activity pathway or whether we can use this TDC Global Constructed Wetland Consent, which our team has been using so far. And yeah, so first things first, you want to find a catchment that is less than 20 hectares in size. You can do that on TDC Top of the South maps, use our tools there, contours and measures, and get started there. If your catchment is larger, the Global Constructed Consent currently goes up to 50 hectares, and we're in the process of applying for a consent to work in larger hectares up to 200 to 300 hectares in size, which is exciting. And have a look and see if there are any existing natural wetlands in the catchment. They might have been identified by our TDC wetlands team already, or if not, we can send our wetland ecologists out for a visit. Because as soon as we get our diggers out and we start working with hydrology, we want to make sure we're not altering the hydrology of any wetlands upstream or downstream. We want to protect those as much as we can. And just a general rough indication of whether a waterway in your catchment might be suitable for a permitted activity wetland. Sort of your median flow for a stream should be less than 2 litres per second, and you can just use the bucket method, the 2 litre bucket, time it, see how long it takes to fill up. And hopefully you don't have any culverts like that, because that is a fish passage issue, but you just might need to find a tight part of your waterway or create your own kind of barrier and blockage there, really. And if you have any catchments on your property that might fit that bill, contact myself and the team at TDC. We've got a new team email, Freshwater Improvements. That means if I'm away, you can still reach someone. And our resource consent team can actually give free advice on this. And Matt McDowell on in our resources consents team is on the call today to answer any questions you might have. Because there are a lot of grey areas at the moment with the new freshwater legislation, and especially Te Mana o Te Wai. We have to look really closely at where we're building wetlands and how. Now we're moving towards offline wetlands, and we really need to think about how we're managing any sediment discharges and protecting any fish in our waterway. Because Te Mana o Te Wai is that fundamental concept that the well-being of our waterways is the most important. So yeah, our intention is there. Our intention is to improve ecology and biodiversity and water quality in these wetlands, and we just need to make sure we're going about it the right way. So our team can help with that. And yeah, once we've sort of looked at the catchment in more detail, looked at the different conditions around permitted activities, and we've sort of figured out the best option, we can advise on what way to go and where. If your wetland project doesn't quite meet a permitted activity under the Tasman Resource Management Plan, our consents team can look at MOTSI, which is when it's like a marginal or temporary non-compliance. So if your catchment or project fits most of the conditions, but maybe it's 21 hectares or the waterway is a bit larger, or you've got some interesting natural wetlands in the area, our consents team can look at that project, and with that intention of improving water quality and biodiversity, see if we can help these projects go ahead without consent. Because our other option with the TDC global consent for constructed wetlands, that's been really amazing. It's helped us construct wetlands like this. So this is in the Moropipi catchment. It's still an expensive process, and it's still a lot more than most landowners can afford. We are supporting some really cool projects in the Moutere through this constructed wetland consent, where some landowners are providing the digger and the earthworks, or they're funding the works and planting on the ground, and then our Catchment Enhancement Fund is supporting through expert design on this. And yeah, that's it's a really quick run through of what we'll do at TDC. So I'm just keen to hear whether anyone has any questions.
Well, thanks, Emma. If you can unshare your screen.
Oh.
Right. Does anybody have any questions?
Ask a question of Emma.
Yep.
We've got a couple of potential sites for created wetlands in gullies adjoining roadways, and the areas are already fenced. They would have catchments of about 6 or 7 hectares upstream. My concern would be, I would expect to see eels cope with any kind of construction we did. But if we were to build a wall, say 1 metre to 2 metres high with a spillway, would we be guilty of prohibiting access to things like Kokopu, which I would love to see come upstream, but we might in fact be preventing them? How are you going to do?
That is a good question, and one of the conditions is that any wetland we construct must allow for fish passage. But if we go out and have a look at your catchment, there might be, we can look at downstream and see if there's suitable passage up to the wetland or suitable habitat for Kokopu to get up there. And we can also help you with that spillway design to make sure, if it's in an appropriate part of the catchment that Kokopu would be able to reach naturally, that it's of the right slope and the right design to allow for really special species like that to get up into those wetlands.
All right. Thank you. Could I try a supplementary question?
Go for
it. If we were to get you TDC staff consents to come and look at these 2 sites, and we decided to proceed with building either a series of ponds or a larger wetland, and I think because of the gradient we might be looking at a series of ponds, what sort of fees would we be looking at to have to pay to TDC for the whatever work you did? We would expect to pay for I suppose for the earthworks and the planting. That would be on us, but what external fees might we be faced with?
Well, in terms of our consent advice, our consent team can give 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours of free advice, and I can provide advice and design assistance free of charge, and site visits as well free of charge. If it remains permitted activity wetland, then we don't need to go into all of the conditions that the constructed wetland consent requires, and that can be a lot more expensive. But yeah, we can work through any unanticipated costs for the permitted activities wetlands together, because we haven't done any yet. But the aim of these is to make costs as low as possible, and costs usually come in through sort of expert design and that may not be needed in a really small catchment or a relatively dry gully with an ephemeral stream. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis.
Well, further, maybe more of a statement than a question, then I think it would be really helpful for us and maybe for a lot of other landowners and people interested in this issue to perhaps have a kind of a dry run, if you don't mind the pun, at somebody's site, and I'd be quite happy for it to be at our site, just to run through all the pros and cons and the suitability of the site, and it's all very well watching it here in theory, and that's great. You've done a good job of explaining what we can do, but there's nothing quite like an on-site description of what we would like to see and how you would like to see it done. So
look, there's going to be 3 constructed wetlands built in the Moutere catchment this autumn, and there will be field trips to them.
Great.
And there also will be this non-consented one that will be built in the Motueka catchment, because the funding from their from MPI will be used for some of that. So there will be some opportunity, but there's also opportunity to have individual visits to sites for people as well. So yeah, good idea. Yeah, this is not just an exercise. This is, we want something, built and relevant to come out of it.
Thank you.
Can I just real quick comment on one of his questions? The nice thing is if you build a spillway properly, the and it should be at a slight slope, it shouldn't inhibit fish movement when water's flowing through those spillways. So if it's built at a good slope, so and it's a little bit more challenging in a gully system, but it can be done. But if you get a nice gentle slowing spillway, they'll just go right up it in the when water's flowing, and then that wetland in the back will actually act as a habitat for them. Usually those gully systems dry out, and if they go up, they come back down, but then you're actually creating fish habitat.
Esther, if you want to get ready to speak, there's a question here, Emma, on the chat things. What are the options for additional funding for the wetland? And so I'll start off with well, there's it's a plant subsidy for a start off. And Emma, what's available if you're in Tasman?
Yes, we have the Catchment Enhancement Fund available. It is booked to projects for the rest of this year and up to July of next year. But yeah, any projects I'm happy to put forward to the Catchment Enhancement Fund. We have lost some funding recently. The budgets are tightening at Tasman, unfortunately. But so we don't have an endless amount of funding, but there is some funding available, and we try to prioritise projects in high value catchments that can provide high value ecosystem services like wetlands. So yeah, encourage you to apply.
Excellent. Well, Esther's from Nelson City Council, and obviously it's a different council, so he's got something to say about the rules that apply to Nelson.
Yeah, kia ora. Just before I'm getting unstable internet notifications. Am I coming through all right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, before I take up anyone's time, can I just get an indication if there are any landowners from Nelson in the workshop at the moment? Either just type in chat or raise your hand.
There may not be, Esther, but there's 8 that registered, so, and they'll be emailed it out. So we still probably need to cover that.
Yep. So, okay. So for Nelson, in terms of rules, yeah, generally speaking, the vast majority of the time, yeah, constructed wetland work is not going to be a permitted activity. We do, however, have a environmental grant scheme that we've been running for about the past 4 years, where wetland restoration or constructed wetlands are consistently one of the priority projects that we'll fund. So yeah, we're not set up with a global consent the way TDC is. That's something that we're working towards probably in the next year or so. But we do have an environmental grant scheme where we deliver between $300,000 and $400,000 a year to private landowners looking at doing stock exclusion fencing from waterways, wetland restoration, riparian planting, hill country erosion fund planting. So if you are in the Nelson region and are looking at potentially taking on a constructed wetland project, definitely get in touch with us. You can get in touch with the general council email address and it will make its way to me or the Nelson Nature email address. We can provide technical advice around what the consenting process might be, what we're able to fund through the grant process. It's usually a cost share arrangement with the landowner around fencing and planting and earthworks and consenting costs. We're currently involved in a quite a large constructed wetland project with Cable Bay Adventure Park, where they're looking at diverting an old farm drain back into its original stream alignment, and having a sort of a bit of an oxbow that connects to quite a large constructed wetland. So we're kind of ironing out the process through that project and are hoping to support landowners sort of over the next few years. We're in a similar position as TDC in terms of budgets as well, with the recent flood work kind of throwing a bit of a spanner in the works for our funding programs. So this year we're directing grant funding towards flood recovery stuff, working with landowners to address that. But if you are looking at a constructed wetland project in the Nelson area, definitely get in touch. We'd still like to hear from you and support you however we can.
And so I remember visiting a big wetland up one of the rivers that Nelson City Council had built. Sort of public access. It's really worthwhile going to have a look at. Where is that?
So that's Groom Creek wetland up the Maitai there, sort of just across the river from the motor camp. It was sort of put in as a combined sediment trap, catching runoff from the forestry in the gully above, as well as a wetland restoration project. It was hit quite hard in the recent floods. One of the top pools filled up with gravel quite well, but I think if you look at it over the whole, it's held up quite well. So the bottom of the wetland pools are still there, functioning as a wetland. There's native plantings that have done really well. A lot of bird life there. So I think it's a really good example of what can be achieved for a constructed wetland, where it was just quite a it was basically an agricultural drain where the gully was grazed above it, and there's stream put into an incised drain, which was then restored back into a wetland. So there's a few examples around, and would be keen to talk to landowners looking at undertaking projects.
Cool, thank you. So for all you landowners sitting there, imagining where you might want to put a wetland, have you got any other last questions? Or I thought the talk was, even I followed the talk and I thought it was really good, but there's probably still some purely questions about specific sort of sites that people might have.
I've got a question for Nathan around the constructed wetland guidelines that NIWA have just put out. Do you have any input into those resources, or do you have any thoughts on those? Is it a good resource to be pushing for landowners, or are there problems with it? Or what's your opinion?
Again, like they're ideal situations, and sometimes working on farms we don't hit those ideal situations. Though it's a good resource. If I how do I say this politely? I was aghast at the cost on some of those. But again, there's a lot of externality cost in a lot of those wetlands. When you start reading through it, and because I started looking, and they were like these little half-hectare wetlands that were costing $50,000 to $60,000. I'm like, well, why? You start looking into the cost, and I had a little bit of talk with Chris about it. But I mean, they got some of that cost is around contractors. They have a project manager that's getting paid. They have engineers, and it builds up really quickly. And to be honest with you, a lot of times those costs are a little bit high and scare people. And you know, they're not that complicated. Chris does a great job, and they're very good to go by. And they're what you aim for. You know what I mean? But it's really hard to fit those wetlands, some of those wetland designs into some of our farming systems. And when we try, it blows the cost up pretty high. So to me, it's a way between an ideal constructed wetland versus, yeah, we're not going to get as ideal, but you know, we're going to get there. You know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, don't get afraid. Don't let those costs get you off. The other thing is generally when NIWA does those wetlands, they plant very thickly. I can't remember what they plant. So it's almost a quarter meter spacing, because they want the wetland up and going right away. And basically, when I'm talking to landowners, said, hey, just get it planted, and the plants over the next couple of years will grow in. And because that's the biggest cost is the plants. You're not going to get the water quality gains right away, but you're not going to get those. We didn't get to the situation right away either. So it's just one of those things that we weigh. You know, it's how do you weigh when you're dealing with costing?
Yeah, so on average, about 60% of the cost of a wetland is the planting. So for people in the Moutere catchment, while you can still get the plants for free, it's a really good opportunity to get wetlands in. And, you know, even for the rest of Nelson and Tasman, where there's, you know, a potential plant subsidy for, anyway, the trees and the shrubs greater than 2 meters, it's an opportunity to take it. But we're also, Elliot Easton's on the call here, and he's the project manager for the Moutere catchment. And him and I, along with some others, had a bit of a discussion with a company that's looking at direct seeding. And early days, and it may not go ahead, but we are interested in looking at that as an option to try and reduce the cost. But we would just have to trial out in plots in different situations if that goes ahead. But it's also not that difficult to grow your own carrot sector and flaxes and rushes. And the carrot sector, I notice, are flowering at the moment. So probably in January, early February, there'll be seed around. So that's another option. Okay, are there any other questions that people might have? Well, I'd hate to run an event and actually end up on time. That would just be very unheard of for me. That's excellent. Can I just have, how many people, we do have 5 or so minutes, and I know you don't really like speaking in public, Monique, but do you want to just mention what you might be doing around the Motueka Delta and the big projects that's going on there? And Blair, you might like to talk about that.
Kia ora. Yeah, it's it's part of the Jobs for Nature funded work. Around about 3 hectares, 2.5, 3 hectares in size, and just following on from what you mentioned there, Annette, hopefully about 1.9 of those hectares we'll do some direct seeding on. We're hopeful. We have in our promise to MFE anyway to do 40,000 plants by direct seeding. So it is something we will try in the region. That is the constructed wetland principle, if you like. We kind of do a compromise between the NIWA and the DIY version. So we managed to keep the costs down around the bottom end of what NIWA's projections were. We don't put a lot of money into detailed design. We tend to work with an ecologist or a local consultant in the field and direct the excavator operators. So I would certainly say that I think one of the keys to success is keeping it really simple, but getting hold of Emma or myself or Asita or somebody to give you that little bit, even if it's half an hour or an hour of time, to give you some ecological advice, because a lot of people think of wetlands like with a duck pond with an island in the middle and a mai, and it's a wetland. And if you really want to achieve the wider outcomes of what you're doing, Nathan's talk is really important to get that diversity. So by all means reach out and use the resources that are there.
Blair, when's that constructed wetland going to be built down there? And
it's programmed for construction in late summer of 2024, so February, March 2024. We will be building one in February coming. That's the one at the Porter site in the Moutere on George Harvey Road. And so, I'm sure, Annette, you'll be liaising and corralling people to get some involvement there. It's a pretty cool site with some pretty cool people, so very open to sharing.
Right.
I will just add to that, Blair. Detailed plans and designs are all great, but I have yet to see one that actually we spend a lot of time on engineer drawings and that kind of thing, and then you put your digger right into the ground and realize that those drawings get thrown out right away because there's something that was unseen. And I think it's one of the reasons I keep mine down is to keep it simple and do my I do the project management. I sit there with the digger operator and we do it as we go, and it does save us some money. Really quick, I'll show you if Annette, do we get time, Annette, if I can show a photograph of one of my wetlands that's a year on after we planted it up with Carex sectus and Cyperus estellatus. So you get your plants in there, they can fill up pretty quickly. But it's a beautiful planting, and that plants, the landowner grew all her plants for it.
Looks good. You're peering at it closely and making comments. That's the disadvantage of actually having your camera on.
Yes.
Right. Well, if there's no more questions, we are finishing exactly on time. So thank you very much for everyone. And I'll be sending this out. Nathan did a much more comprehensive workshop over in Takaka a couple of years ago, building big constructed wetlands. In fact, there was even a shot of that in his presentation there. I'll send you a link to that as well if you haven't had enough information. So yeah, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Nathan, very much for giving the talk, and Emma and Esther. And yeah, happy building.